And this is a story that grew out of a curiosity of mine. I was always interested in the relationship between brothers. I have an older sister, I love her to bits, but brothers and sisters have different interests, different sets of friends. Brothers relate in a different way. So I was interested to see how two brothers grow together, the younger brother drafting behind the older brother, kind of making his way in the world, following in his brother's footsteps, trying to fill his shadow. Now along the way, one of the brothers passes away, and that's really where the story begins. And there's no spoilers here. In fact, in the first passage, I tell you, the brothers are Trajan and Langston Hopkins. And the book is set near where I grew up in southeastern Connecticut. So the claim to fame in southeastern Connecticut is, if you've read any of Wally Lamb's work, I know this much is true, was set pretty much in the same area where I grew up. When I read that book, it just really, lit a fire underneath me. That I wanted to tell stories, that I, first of all, came to understand that you could tell stories in this place where I grew up, but I wanted to tell it more from my perspective. The other thing that's going on in the area is there's a resurgence. It's probably 10, 15, almost 20 years old now, but a resurgence of the Native American culture. So when you drive around, you see Pequannock Bridge, you see Pequot Medical Center, you see all of these references. There are two tribes that are actively running casinos in the area. The Mohegan, run the Mohegan Sun, and the Mashantucket Pequot have a casino as well. There's a third tribe, the Eastern Pequot, that are still working to be recognized. So Trajan and Langston come from that group of Eastern Pequot. So again, not a spoiler, I do tell you at the very beginning, first passage, Trajan Hopkins at his brother's memorial service. You may never have been to the place that I call home, but I trust that you too have a home, that you come from someplace. I don't know the place you claim any more than you know mine. Yet if my someplace speaks to your someplace, if it conjures thoughts of home, then you might come to know me. To know me, you'll have had to know my brother. He was my whole world. So this is a brother who's just lost his older brother. Now I wasn't going to read it, but I'm sandwiched between two people who are very steeped in history. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history about the area. Just so you know a little bit about Connecticut, it was important to me to, as I was writing this book, there are a number of people from the region who are interested in the book, and I'm unearthing things that they probably walked past their entire lives and never paid much attention to. But being that I'm way down here in Texas, I thought it was worthwhile to share with people a little bit about the Connecticut that I know. So Trajan Hopkins lived his whole young life in Preston, a dimple of a town nestled among a string of dimple towns lining the banks of the Thames River as the river makes its slow march into the Sound. Long Island jutting like a raised index finger from the tip of New York to protect Connecticut's southeastern shore from the steady crush of the sea. The Thames River Valley mutated over the years into an oddly shuffled deck of hard-scrabbled little enclaves, making their faint impersonation of urban strife, surrounded by the quaint veneer of buttoned-down New England sensibilities. Time marked a peripatetic crisscrossing of peoples, mixing peaceably in most instances, retreating at the end of any given day to their own neutral corners, the melting pot amounting to little more than steaming compartments, from native to all flavors immigrant to those non-immigrants whose arrival on these shores signifies a period of deep contradiction in our nation's psyche, their forefathers having been dragged forcibly to the land of the free. Together they forged a tenuous harmony of existence comprising the only world Trajan had ever known. The village of Preston is largely defined by the things it is not, by the things its expanse of working farms and decaying historic landmarks serve to subdivide. The town sits too far upriver to share a whaling history with New London, its neighbor to the south, is too far removed from the Sound to claim a part in the seaport mystic boast as its crown jewel, lacks sufficient battle lore to go down in history as namesake to the famed Colonel Legend, run through with his own sword for refusing to surrender his fort to the British. Instead, Preston is home to a disjoint scattering of mill roads and numbered byways, named according to the places they can take you to or from. Norwich Westerly Road providing the town's most traveled thoroughfare. The richness and cultural diversity found throughout the region is visible solely on a microscopic level, requiring you to wander about armed with a satchel of DNA swabs, instructing people to stick out their tongues. Taken individually, everyone is in the minority. The assortment of ethnicities barely amassing sufficient numbers to warrant distinction. New England austerity casting a disapproving eye on any attempt to affix labels. Seen together, the people of the River Valley represent a long and varied history, anchoring a slow blossoming culture the same way the earth was formed. one layer at a time. The native comprises the region's inner core, a solid center ensconced in molten lava, spawning a scattering of interrelated tribal allegiances. Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, and Mohegan. Pilgrims arrived in time to form the lower mantle, reshaping the core with destructive force by most accounts. The wave of European settlers that followed imported slave labor and indentured servants, Africans followed by the Chinese, to settle the upper mantle and hardened outer crust. The rest of the world arrived in flocks from Thailand, the Philippines, New Zealand, Guam, Brazil, Colombia, Panama, Guatemala, Argentina, Venezuela, Guyana, the Caribbean, decorating the land's rough surface with flowering grasses and colorful plants and shrubs. So that's just a little brush of what you find in Connecticut. And interesting enough, as I was writing the book, I'm thinking about people that I grew up around. And that's where Panama, Guatemala, Guyana, all of these places came from, because those are people that I went to school with. We didn't talk much about our individual heritage, our individual cultures, until the casinos hit. And then it became very important to name who you belong to, because there was an opportunity to kind of come up with the casinos, with the native tribes. But it is a place that is really rich in cultural diversity. It's one of the things that, as I'm thinking back on the people I knew, the stories that I was told, there's a family, Gaston. It's probably Gaston. It's French, it's Haitian. But they didn't talk about being from Haiti. They were just another brown kid like me. We all played together, we all did our thing. But as I was writing the book, I thought it was important to kind of reach back and think about where these people came from, how they arrived in Connecticut, and I used that to kind of fuel the story. So again, we'll jump back into the narrative more about my protagonist, Trajan, has lost his older brother, Langston. And when we talk about a brother losing an older brother, there's also a mother, there's a father, there's a Grandpa Took in here, who's probably my favorite character in the book. He's kind of standing by, trying to hold his family back together after this tragedy. So I'll jump into the point after which Langston has passed away, and they are at a hearing to understand what's gone on. Details of the circumstances surrounding Trajan's brother's death were difficult to assemble. The police report disclosed that the deceased had been detained shortly after midnight. After initial questioning, the officers placed the young man in the back of their patrol car, at which time the subject became agitated, slamming himself repeatedly against the glass partition that separated the back seat from the driver's compartment. The officers removed the subject from the vehicle upon ascertaining that the source of his distress was involuntary, assuring he posed them no material threat. Paramedics dispatched to the scene would later testify at a preliminary hearing called on behalf of the Hopkins family by the district attorney's office that they had to instruct the officers to remove the handcuffs as they attempted to render aid. Officers Dooling and Wendt testified at the hearing that there had been no struggle, that the prisoner had been compliant from the outset. Suspect, the assistant DA said, to remind them of the correct terminology to use when referring to anyone in police custody. The person's guilt or innocence, not theirs to determine. You failed to mention in your report that the suspect had been handcuffed, she continued, beginning her inquiry. The officers acknowledged having cuffed the suspect before placing him in the back seat of their patrol vehicle. The police union rep appointed to accompany the officers to the hearing added matter-of-factly that the patrol officers weren't required to indicate whether or not they had cuffed the suspect before placing him in the back seat. That is, after all, standard procedure, no point including every ancillary detail in the incident report. He sought the ADA's approval with raised eyebrows for having used the proper term, suspect, rather than convicted criminal. Both officers answered a swift no when asked whether they had struck Trajan's brother. In reference to the medical examiner's note of abrasions on the subject's forehead and chin, the older of the two offered that they had attempted to remove the suspect from the cruiser to keep him from vomiting up his own tongue when he tumbled beyond their grasp and fallen to the pavement. Face first, Mrs. Consalves questioned, her stare unyielding behind tortoise-rimmed reading glasses. Yes, face first, if I recall correctly, the officer replied, twisting a new dimple in the knot of his standard issue police blue tie. Officer Wendt, the less seasoned of the two officers, was far less mechanical with his account. His eagerness to unravel the string of events that resulted in Langston's death rivaling that of Trajan, Langston's brother. Officer Wendt took care to call Langston by his proper name. Mr. Hopkins seemed fine back there at first. He claimed to be looking for a party some kids told him about When asked his reason for gaining entrance to the factory, it didn't appear that he had broken in, what with most of the windows and doors broken out already. Officer Dooling shifted his weight restlessly, the legs of his chair squealing in loud disapproval against the hard linoleum floor at his partner's testimony. We pulled him from the cruiser once we noticed Mr. Hopkins was in a state of distress. Officer Wendt continued, "In haste, we must have lost our grip, allowing him to fall. His eyeballs swelled in their sockets, a protruding Adam's apple rocking deep inside his throat to coax out the words. Without warning, everything inside him seized up. Then his body went still, like a swift wind had blown across a candle and put out the flame. Then he just lay there. The ADA thanked him for his graphic account, but asked that he stick to the facts, hoping to spare Mrs. Hopkins any further theatrics. You admit then to having dropped the subject?" "Yes," the officer replied. "I mean, we were holding him when he fell, and then he seized," she pressed. "Yes, I suppose that's how it happened," he responded. "You suppose it happened that way, or you clearly recollected having happened that way?" Officer Dooling stood in protest. "You going to open your mouth a single time today?" he said to the top of the union rep's bald head. "Say something," he urged, yanking the rep by the elbow to stand alongside him. Then he turned to address the ADA, his red face gleaming. "What difference does it make whether he fell first or seized then fell?" Dooling said. "The man was in trouble back there. We did our best to help him. It's a god-awful shame he didn't make it in the end, but my partner and I are not to blame for this man's death." So as the book proceeds, I then go to, so we've lost a brother now. What's happened now is the mother has locked herself inside her room in a state of depression, not able to come out. And what happens in the balance of the story is this younger brother, the son, remaining in her care, is really left to wander. But we first talk about, where is the mother, what's going on with her. So chapter called Withdrew. If I was a spiteful woman, Dottie confided into the phone to the boys' Aunt Sherry one night, long after Trajan should have gone off to sleep. I could find someone to hate, someone to blame. If I was a church-going person, I would know how to pray, could call on my God and bring an end to this ordeal. Trajan would have heard his mother sobbing had she cried herself to sleep at night, would have spotted the visible clues had she taken to squandering her days lost in a fit of angry tears. Never one to throw fits, Dottie Hopkins instead, ever so quietly, ever so calmly, withdrew. "Ma," Trajan asked, through his mother's closed bedroom door, taking the knob in his hand, hoping to be let in. "Can you hear me?" "I hear you fine, Trajan," Dottie responded. "What is it you need?" His mother had been sunshine and rain since the night his brother died. With any luck today, she would be sunshine. He thought he'd heard her showering that morning while the sky was still dark outside. He hoped that a stand-up shower might spell a departure from her lie-around, tub-soaking ways. "I came to remind you that today is your birthday." "I know today is my birthday. You think your mother's gone soft in the head? Is there something special you want to do today?" "No," she replied, "today is nothing special." "But Ma, it's your birthday. We need to celebrate." "Celebrate what, Trajan? Another year on this earth?" "I celebrate warm baths, clean sheets to lie in afterward. These things I do on a regular basis. Why wait another day to celebrate?" "Ma, I'm being serious." "I'm being serious too," she assured him, groans from the mattress, suddenly put upon as his mother shifted position in bed, grumbling through the shut door. "Tell you what," she offered, "how about I give you my birthday on top of your own to do with as you please, seeing as you have so much celebration in you? Wouldn't that be special?" Trajan let go of the knob, defeated. "Happy birthday, Trajan," she beamed from the other side of the locked bedroom door. "Be sure to have a slice of cake for me." He rested an open palm on one of the door's raised panels, registered the empty feel of its hollow core. "Happy birthday, Ma," he whispered into the door frame before turning up the hallway. "Here's to another year." She understood his plight. Witnessed boys his age left standing in the gap, consumed by the circumstance surrounding their problems beyond their years to grasp. "I'll be back to you in time," she made her silent plea, while she could still bear to rest her eyes along in his skin. His profile, a mix of Chester and Langston, blended by his share of time spent inside the hem of her skirt. "Countless times, someday just this side of forever, I'll get back to being your mother. This much I promise." I want to read one more small bit just to talk about, again, sort of the mother, where she is, but it also gives you a little sense of Connecticut. We've talked about very hot Texas. I take you to cold Connecticut for a minute. Maybe it'll give us some relief outside. She rose each day with every intention of getting over it, of slipping out from beneath the burden of grief that time had heaped on her, of setting aside her troubles and taking back her life. When Dottie was a girl, Grandpa Took had taken her to see the movie about the boy in the plastic bubble. The boy in the movie longed for a taste of the outside world. She wanted just the opposite. She wished to bring the rest of the world inside the bubble with her, seal it tight on what she had before any more of it could slip away. Took fixed her daily meals after Trajan left in the morning. Cereal with coffee and toast for breakfast. A bagel or fresh pastry on special request. He left extra provisions for lunch on a tray next to her bed. Peanut butter and crackers, bread and jam, nuts and dried fruit, things that could be trusted to keep without refrigeration. He enabled his daughter in that way, accommodated her weakness, her family. Dottie ate her meals in strict order as the sole means of keeping her day right side up. She slept when she was tired, sat up when she had the energy. She noted the time as Trajan slammed the door each morning. This part of the day was foreign to her, the rest of the world having gone off to work or school, not to return for another several hours. Winter cuts the day in peculiar ways. The sun starts strong in the sky, causing icicles to melt along the windowsill. Before long, clouds set in, allowing the icicles to regain their shape, longer even, water dripping from the snow-covered rooftop, increasing their potency. By 3:30, 4 o'clock, the sun has begun its retreat, the sky heading toward the black of night. It's no wonder birds choose to fly south for the winter, she thought. This is no way to live. She listened to the rain outside her window, delighted in knowing she didn't have to go out in the wet, had no place to be. It didn't rain inside her bedroom. Neither snow nor sleet nor hail fell from the modest height of her popcorn ceiling. She took steps to contend with the hot and cold, light and dark in her day, worked to maintain a constant equilibrium in the world inside her bubble. She buried herself beneath another layer of blankets when the cold came knocking at her windowsill, donned long sleeves and warm socks. She switched the light on any time the sun refused to shine, lifted the window shade when the sun deigned to cooperate. Sound proved wildly less obedient. Weather doesn't masquerade hot pretending to be cold and vice versa. The sound of an empty house played havoc with the calendar. Trajan was a bundle inside her arms the last stretch of time she'd spent at home during the day, Langston a toddler running small errands back and forth to the kitchen for his mother. Any voice she heard belonged to a child of hers, sometimes both boys calling to her at once, babbling in sing-song unison. Their voices were school age as the day came to a close, racing one another to her front door after the school bus dropped them off. By nightfall, she was alone again, resting in the place life had left her, sitting alone inside her bubble. Grandpa Took bought Langston a collection of Smurf miniatures one year for his birthday, a bubbling brood of big-eared blue gnomes cast in rubberized skin. The boys would spend entire days on the back deck, weather permitting, working to defeat the wizard Gargamel, sworn enemy of the Smurfs, a tiny armful of which Langston carried everywhere he went before his brother came into the world. Papa Smurf, Brainy Smurf, Lazy Smurf, Smurfette. To his mind, Trajan may well have been the latest Smurf character creation, baby brother Smurf. Langston used to drag his brother around the house day and night, like a favorite pet. Come on, Trajan, time to get up, time to go outside, time to play, time to go back inside, time to rest, time to eat, time to go to sleep. He spoke to Trajan so continuously, the little fellow abandoned interest temporarily in learning to talk. No need to ask what we were planning to do next, just wait a few minutes and his older brother would tell him. Once Trajan began talking, his brother's name refused to come off his tongue the way it needed to. Langston, he would say, I'm going to tell Mom if you don't quit. Stop being such a baby, Langston complained. I'm not being a baby, Trajan insisted, even on occasion when he was being a baby. Dottie wished she could keep them babies forever, hold them in the safe confines of the tiny space her husband had fenced in on one side of their duplex apartment, where the worst either might suffer was a bump on the noggin from a tumble off the red and yellow plastic play school slide Dottie had purchased for the two of them to share. Big boys now know how to take turns, she advised from her place at the kitchen window, wanting them to learn to get along with the world in spite of how ill-prepared she was to see them grow up. So that is a bit from the Unheralded King of Preston Plains Middle.
Does anybody have any questions?
Questions?
I want to know, where is your heritage? Where did your family come from?
So my heritage, if I look across grandparents, on my father's side from Guyana, so West Indian. That's his mother. His father was from Texas, from the Houston area, and probably Oklahoma. So there are some Native American roots there as well, Blackfoot Indian. On my mother's side, there's Jamaica, and then if you think about colonization that took place, there's some European blood in there somewhere, but I don't know, that part of the family tree.
And so when did they move up to?
Everyone, my grandmother moved to New York City as a child. Grandmother on my mother's side, as did the grandparents on my father's side. So they all grew up, met each other in Harlem in a housing project. So that's again where I think people coming from Guyana, from Texas, from Georgia, from Jamaica, and all of a sudden they're in New York City, freezing, trying to stay warm, trying to make it up there. So my family is from New York. I was born in New York, but I grew up very shortly after. My father was in the Navy. So we went to the West Coast for a bit of time, and then probably from the time I was 5, we were in the London, Connecticut area. So that's where I grew up. That's what I consider home. And it's everyone descended on New York, and that was the start for my sister and me. Please.
How did you become a writer? Writing fiction? Was that
I started writing shortly after my oldest daughter was born, up late night with her on my arm, and it was just a distraction, something to do. Before I went to school, I used to draw all the time, just sketch. And after 4 years of college, plus a couple years of grad school, I lost that skill. It just wasn't there. I can draw really well with crayon for some reason, and I can draw with chalk on the sidewalk, but a pen on paper just doesn't go so well. But I needed a creative outlet, and I started writing little stories, essays here and there, and I originally attempted a story about brothers, and I called it A Brother's Guide to Growing Up, and it just became too preachy. Every lesson I wanted a younger brother to learn, I was hammering the reader over the head with it. So I set that manuscript aside, really abandoned it, and I later picked this story up, and I wanted to talk about the Native American influences in Connecticut. It was occurred shortly after I left, so after I went away to college, but it's still something that plays, really big in the area today. But I also wanted to revisit this story about brothers. And I use the term dislocation. And lots of things can be a source of dislocation. You move from Connecticut, I went to school in North Carolina. So it didn't matter I was a black kid, I was a kid from Connecticut. That stood out more than anything, going to school in North Carolina. That was my source of dislocation. For Trajan, losing his brother is his source of dislocation. So I wanted to explore the story, and as I was researching, there were little things that I found just interesting about Connecticut along the way. There's a waterfall, a place called Indian Leap. And the story is a chief chased another chief, was being chased by another chief, and he leapt off of this ledge to safety, and they all fell and died. And it's called Indian Leap. And those are things that I found interesting researching, and I managed to include them in the book. So. Other questions?
This is more of an observation, less a question. Myra talked about slavery. This is obviously not the gospel. I'm going to talk about slavery.
Right.
It seems that just in the past few years, a lot of writers are beginning to grapple with some of those issues. And I don't know if you have any observation or any insight into that. But I just find it kind of fascinating that all of a sudden,
I think it's important to know where you come from. And regardless of how sullied your history is, you have to know how you got here. Now, I've only really talked about Trajan and his mother, so their family, but there has to be a conflict in the story, and there's a villain. There's actually a would-be villain, someone who you suspect is the villain, turns out not to be as bad, and then there's someone who turns out to really be the villain. What I do is take their 3 stories and really talk about how did they, when I met people in North Carolina, they want to know how did the black kid wind up in Connecticut? Well, I wound up there because my dad was in the Navy, and he went from New York City to Hawaii, and then to New London. That's where my sister and I were born. My sister was born. We went to the West Coast, and then finally came back to Connecticut. So I can trace how I wound up in Connecticut, but I've got one character who's of Haitian descent. How did he wind up there? And he's escaping just poverty in Haiti. Happened to have a family member in New Haven and followed that thread up the coast. The other family is from St. Martin. And a little aside, the girl who I took to the prom was from St. Martin. And I studied French, and her father would make me speak French to him all the time as a test, as a quiz. But the other family is from St. Martin, and I was able to roll a little bit of French into the story. So these three threads all wind up in Connecticut. So it's just a matter of understanding where you're from. Now, I mentioned my grandmother's from Savannah. You know, her mother was from Savannah. Her mother's mother was probably born into slavery. So I point to West Africa, but I haven't traced that route. My mother's looked a little bit, she's traced things, and she's gone back to West Africa. And I think it's just, you know, it's where you're from. And, you know, by no means am I fit or in a position to go back to Africa, but knowing that that's where my roots started, knowing that there is in this country a history of slavery. You know, I talked about the people who were dragged forcibly to the land of the free. There is a category of people where that is our history, that is our experience. But then you, just in my heritage, you look at the native experience. The West Indies were also populated by slaves, but if you meet someone from the West Indies, they're very proud to not be, you know, they got off the boat. They claim they fought their way off the boat. The boat stopped early, let a few people off, but they have their own root in a West Indian culture. When you think about the food that's in even places like New Orleans, that came from, you know, Africa, from the slave trade, went through the West Indies, and wound up in various parts of the country. Now, I'm doing a reverse migration. Started in Connecticut, went to school in North Carolina, spent some time in Georgia, now I'm here in Texas. I just like warmer weather. So that's the simple truth.
Well, how do you end up in Austin, and in Texas, in Austin?
Just as a function of my day job. I'm an engineer by day, and I followed a technology trail. So I started out working in New Jersey with AT&T, Big Ma Bell. And Ma Bell kind of fell apart, wasn't so big anymore. And then I moved down to Georgia, eventually moved to Austin with a company. I work on things that make your cell phone work. So, yeah, I can't help you with your bill. That's beyond me. But I make the cell phone tick. So I came with a startup company here to Austin.
How are you in Georgia?
Out in the Atlanta area. So Alpharetta, just north of Georgia, of Atlanta. Yeah. Again, working on tech. I went to grad school at Georgia Tech. Met my wife, she went to Georgia State. So we kind of always had an interest in coming back to Atlanta.
Yellow Jacket versus Walker?
That's right, yeah.
Several things have gone through my mind. It doesn't take too much of a stretch to see where the name Langston might have come from.
Yes.
But what about Trajan?
Interesting story. I mentioned I went to school in North Carolina. I'm a huge basketball fan.
Oh.
There is a player from Duke, I believe, Trajan Langdon. So I picked the name Trajan, and then Langdon I transformed into Langston.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about him, so we talk about, I don't talk explicitly, I do in the book, but I didn't read any passages from Trajan and Langston's heritage is actually very similar to Langston Hughes. There's native roots, there's African roots, and then there are European roots. So Langston is a boy who on one side of town, he stands out because of his color. Then on the other side of town, he doesn't quite fit in.
Okay.
He practices martial arts instead of basketball or football, sports that he's expected to play. And this guy, Trajan Langdon, is from Alaska. So how many black people have you met from Alaska? He played basketball for Duke. So a bunch of threads wove together, and I picked up the name Trajan Langdon and turned it into Trajan and Langston.
Well,
Interesting question.
I know there's always some autobiography and fiction writing.
Sure.
Where did you get the story about, was it Langston, was the older boy?
Was the older boy, yeah.
And he was killed by, there's a question right now.
Yeah.
I don't know
Correct.
the answer.
You're reading, you're wondering about that, we gotta read about that.
Yeah.
Was there a case that you knew about where something similar to this happened?
There was a guy who played on our football team, and I talk about in the story, Langston walked everywhere for miles. He would go, and this person that I grew up with would walk everywhere. You'd see him at places and wonder, how did you get here? Oh, I walked. We're 6-7 miles away from our neighborhood.
Yeah.
How did you walk that far? I left early. I took the time. But as he got older, he continued to walk places, and his story's a little different. He was detained somewhere by the police, And he basically had a seizure in the back of the police cruiser and died. And it's just something, this guy played on our football team, so at 25 or so, he's dead. And nothing the police did. I don't talk about police brutality here, I don't talk about corruption, it's just an unfortunate incident. And maybe the agitation, being detained by the police is what worked him up, but he has a seizure and died. And we talk here in the book, Langston suffers,
anything
sure,
away.
sure. But he had a seizure in the back of a police cruiser, and that's where that kind of piece of the story came from.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Robert Stevens will be doing a reading from his book at about 2:15. So
Okay.
feel free to walk around, check out the rest of the books.